He slammed the door in my face and said, "You don't live here anymore, old man." That house, my house, was built with the same hands that once held him when he was 5 and afraid of the dark. I signed it over to him last year because he had a second child and said they needed stability. I believed him. I trusted him. Now I was standing in the rain with nothing but my coat, a worn leather wallet, and a copy of a deed he never bothered to read. What he didn't know was I never gave up all my rights. When my boy was born, I didn't cry at first. I just stared at him, tiny and pink and squinting, and I remember whispering, "I'll never let you feel alone." That promise lived in my bones every day for the next 40 years. His name is Daniel, and for most of his life, he was my pride. Not for what he achieved, but for who he was. A kind-hearted kid, big imagination. He'd sit on the floor with my old toolbox and pretend he was fixing the whole world. I'd come home from the carpentry shop, covered in sawdust and sweat, and he'd run to me like I was a hero. "Daddy, look, I made a rocket ship." And I'd kneel down, sore knees and all, and say, "You just built NASA, kid." His mother, Marjorie, used to laugh from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She made the house a home, warm in every corner. After she passed, cancer took her fast, Daniel was only 11. He sat at the edge of her hospital bed, holding her hand and asking her not to go. After the funeral, it was just him and me. I had no choice but to keep going. Mornings started at 5. I'd make him eggs and toast, braid his lunch in brown paper, then head out to the site. He hated the quiet after school, so I'd rush back just to hear about his day. I taught him to drive in the old Chevy. We rebuilt that transmission together over 2 long summers. Every nail, every bolt I'd show him, righty-tighty, lefty-loosey. He had a knack for it. Steady hands, clear eyes. We used to fix neighbors' sheds just for the fun of it. That was our bond, building. The house itself, the one he would one day take from me, was more than a home. It was a monument. I laid every tile with Marjorie, sanded each banister while Daniel played with scraps beside me. When I built the back porch, he helped stain the wood. We etched a little D+M in the corner post, Daniel and Mom. He never knew I saw him do that. When he went off to college, I cried alone in the shed, proud but hollow. He was the first in our family to make it past high school. He studied business, called once a week, sometimes more. I sent care packages, jerky, socks, notes folded in quarters. When he graduated, he hugged me tight and said, "I made it because of you, Dad." Then came marriage. Rachel. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure about her at first. She was polite, sharp-dressed, but had a way of speaking to people that made you feel ranked, not disliked, just managed. Still, Daniel loved her. And when they moved in with me while saving for a house, I made room, gave them the master bedroom, told them to pretend it was their own. Years passed. Daniel worked long hours. Rachel stayed home after the first baby, Ellie. I became the free babysitter, the handyman, the errand runner, and I loved it. Ellie called me Papa, and she'd curl into my chest every afternoon. Then came Liam, their second. That was when the pressure started. Daniel sat me down one morning after breakfast, Rachel still in her robe, scrolling her phone, and he said, "Dad, we've been talking. It's not right to keep the house in your name when it's really ours now." I remember blinking. "Ours?" He smiled. "You live here, but we're raising our kids here. It's home for them. Legal ownership just makes sense." Rachel added, "And it would make taxes and insurance easier, streamlined." It hit me like a slow wave. But I told myself, they're family. This is what family does. I didn't want them to worry about paperwork. I wanted them to feel secure. So I called my lawyer, We drafted the transfer, and I included a clause, quietly, just in case. Daniel signed without reading the second page. I almost stopped him, but something in me, some flicker of Marjorie's voice, told me to keep that final bit tucked away. The clause was simple. I retained the right to sell the property under specific conditions if at any point I was excluded from the home for more than 30 consecutive days. That clause was my last stitch of self-respect, and I never thought I'd need it. For a while, things stayed warm. We had dinners together. I told stories at the fireplace. Liam learned to walk on the same tiles I laid down when Marjorie was still alive. I'd sit outside in the evenings with a book and a mug of tea, and I'd listen to the laughter inside. But then things shifted. Quietly. Imperceptibly. Rachel started hosting gatherings I wasn't told about. Daniel began locking the liquor cabinet. Ellie stopped sitting in my lap. Liam cried when I picked him up. I chalked it up to growing pains. "It's just the seasons changing," I'd whisper to Marjorie's old picture frame. "They're young, stressed, it'll pass." But the warmth was cooling. The light dimmed just a little every day. I couldn't have known just how cold it would get. Not yet. But the good years, they were real, and they're the only reason I didn't burn it all down sooner. It started small. A quiet reordering of life, like when your favorite chair gets moved a few inches each day, hard to notice at first, but eventually you sit down and fall flat. Rachel stopped leaving a plate for me at dinner. At first, I thought she forgot. She'd serve herself, Daniel, the kids, and then sit without a glance in my direction. I'd grab something from the fridge and join them at the table, pretending it didn't bother me. Daniel would mumble, "Sorry, Dad," but never made it a habit to fix. Then one morning I came into the kitchen to find a post-it note on the coffee pot. "Please rinse after use. This isn't a dorm." I stared at it for a long time. My hand trembled as I poured the coffee I'd bought with the machine I'd installed in the home I built. That night, I heard Rachel whispering in the bedroom as I walked past. My name came up, her tone, tight, clipped. Daniel responded low and tired, like a man trying not to pick sides. I didn't confront them, not yet. But the old house had thin walls, and silence says more than words. The kids began treating me differently too. Ellie, who used to sit beside me during cartoons, now walked right past with a tablet in her hand. Liam would flinch if I touched his head. One time I offered to read to them before bed, our old routine, and Rachel stepped in saying, "They're already overstimulated. Let's not confuse their schedule." I was a confusion now. Even the air felt different. Rachel started using this perfume, floral, sharp, and it clung to everything, the couches, the laundry, the very walls. It pushed out the smell of wood polish and Marjorie's old rosewater spray. The house began to feel like a stranger. I kept quiet. I didn't want to create tension. I told myself, maybe I'm being sensitive. Maybe I'm getting old and paranoid. But doubt doesn't silence your gut. It just delays the fall. One weekend, Daniel asked me to move my tools out of the garage. "We're turning it into a gym," he said. "It's not really your workshop anymore." I stood there, holding a screwdriver, staring at shelves that held my life's work, wood carving sets, hammers worn to the handle, boxes of screws labeled in Marjorie's handwriting. "Where do you want me to put them?" I asked quietly. "We'll figure something out," he said, already pulling down a pegboard. So I boxed them, slowly, carefully, like folding a flag. I moved my things to the shed out back, the one with a leaky roof and no insulation. No one offered to help. Rachel watched through the window while sipping tea. But the shift wasn't just physical. It was emotional. I started noticing how Daniel spoke to me. Short sentences, clipped tones like he was managing a burden. He used to ask for advice on everything. Now he barely made eye contact. Conversations were transactional. Can you pick up the kids? Did you fix the faucet? Don't forget to lock up. It was like I had become staff in my own home. I'd hear them planning vacations without including me. Rachel once corrected me at the dinner table in front of Ellie, snapping, "Actually, that's not how it works anymore, Harold." The girl laughed, and Daniel just smiled nervously and changed the subject. I told myself I was imagining it, but you can't ignore what you feel when you lie awake at night in a house full of people who don't notice you anymore. Then came the financial shift. Daniel asked me one afternoon if I'd consider downsizing my expenses. "Your pension is generous, Dad, but maybe we could rework some bills to take pressure off the household." He used a gentle voice, one I taught him to use with clients, not with family. I blinked. "Pressure? I pay for the mortgage, taxes, and groceries." "Technically," he said, "but on paper it's our house now, and the utilities are in our name, so we're kind of carrying things too." I felt something twist in my chest. Not anger, grief, quiet grief, like watching a tree rot from the inside. I told him I'd think about it. That night I checked my bank account. He didn't know I'd been keeping a separate reserve. I'd always been careful, always. And that's when I began to notice the last shift. The way Rachel looked at me. Like I was furniture, something old and in the way. She'd sigh if I asked a question, scoff if I gave advice. One evening, Liam had a fever. I offered to help make a warm compress, and she turned to me and said, "Let's not complicate things, okay?" Complicate. That word stayed with me. A man who raised her husband, built her home, rocked her children to sleep, that man was now a complication. I started eating dinner alone, reading in the shed. I went days without speaking more than a sentence. Daniel rarely asked if I was okay. And if he did, he didn't really wait for an answer. Sometimes I'd sit on the back porch, our old porch, and look at the D+M carved into the post. I'd touch it with my thumb and whisper, "I miss you, Marjorie. They don't see me anymore." But I was starting to see them, and I knew the shift wasn't random. It was planned. The day it happened, the air was thick with summer heat, the kind that makes your clothes stick and your patience thin. I had just come in from trimming the hedges, something I still insisted on doing myself. I smelled like sweat and old grass clippings, but I didn't mind. It gave me purpose. I stepped inside thinking I'd grab a cold glass of water. The house was unusually quiet. No cartoons blaring from the living room, no distant hum of the dryer. Just the low murmur of voices, Daniel and Rachel in the kitchen. I stopped just before the doorway. I wasn't eavesdropping, not at first, but then I heard my name. "We can't keep living like this, Daniel," Rachel said. "He's always here, always listening, always in the way." "He's my dad, Rachel," she scoffed. "Your dad who doesn't pay rent, who treats this house like it's still his. You said we'd have our own space." I know," he muttered. "It's just complicated." "No, it's not. He needs to go. We need the office space, the playroom, a real life. You said he'd only stay until we got settled." There was silence. I held my breath. I expected Daniel to defend me. He always had, even when he didn't agree. But then I heard it. "I'll talk to him next week, after Liam's birthday." That's when something in me cracked. I didn't say a word. I backed away from the door, my boots muffled by the rug. I walked back outside, around to the shed, and sat down on the wooden stool I kept by the old workbench. My hands trembled. Not from age, no, I'd worked with tremors before, but from something deeper. They wanted me gone, not just out of the way, gone. All these years I'd told myself I was helping them, that my presence was needed. But the truth was, my usefulness had expired. Later that afternoon, Rachel came out to call me in for dinner like nothing had happened. I forced a smile, ate quietly, even praised her casserole, but something in my chest had gone hollow, the kind of hollowness you can't fill with food or small talk. The betrayal wasn't in the words. They were just the final nail. It was in the looks Rachel had been giving me for years. It was in Daniel's silence when she mocked my routines. It was in the way Ellie didn't say goodnight anymore. I was no longer family. I was furniture that breathed. 2 days later, the real humiliation came. Daniel had invited some co-workers over for a barbecue. They'd set up in the backyard, music playing, kids running around with juice boxes. I kept to the side, by the grill. I'd always been the one to grill, the one with the apron Marjorie stitched that said, "License to grill." Rachel approached with a smile so forced it looked painful. "Could you give the grill over to Marcus? He's better with steak." I blinked. "I've grilled here for 30 years. "I know," she said, lowering her voice. "But this isn't about tradition. We want to make a certain impression." She took the tongs from my hand before I could respond. Daniel looked at me from across the yard but didn't say a word, so I stepped back, sat under the oak tree and watched as a man half my age overcooked every piece of meat. The guests didn't care. They laughed, clinked glasses, and made jokes I didn't understand. No one spoke to me. I was the ghost of a man walking among the living. After they left, I asked Daniel if we could talk. We stood in the kitchen, the house dim, the only sound the humming of the dishwasher. "I heard what you and Rachel said," I told him. His face changed, not guilt, not shock, just weariness. "I was going to tell you," he said. "We just need space, Dad. You've been here a long time." "I gave you this house," I whispered. "I know, and we're grateful. But it's our turn now." He said it like I was passing a baton, but no one told me I was running a race to be forgotten. "I kept a clause," I said, my voice shaking. "In the deed." He frowned. "What?" "I never gave it to you completely. I retained a condition. If I'm ever made to feel unwelcome, if I'm excluded from this home, I have the right to sell." "You wouldn't," he said, voice tightening. "That would ruin us." I looked him in the eye. "Then maybe you should have thought about that before trying to erase me." He walked away. Rachel never looked up from her phone. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my shed, clutching Marjorie's old photo, and I cried for the first time in years. Not just for myself, but for the boy I raise, the man he'd become, and the family that forgot how to honor their roots. They thought they owned me, but I had one move left. 2 days after the barbecue, I found a manila envelope sticking out of the trash bin in the home office. It was odd because Daniel usually shredded everything. He was meticulous about that. But this one? It had been torn open lazily, like someone in a hurry to discard a secret. I pulled it out, dusted off the coffee grounds, and read the label. Senior Care Residence Package, Oak Meadows Living. Inside were glossy brochures, padded rooms, community gardens, daily activities, smiling nurses posing with old men who looked nothing like me. Tucked in the back was a price sheet and a handwritten note in Rachel's script. Possible options for Harold. Tour next Friday? My knees went weak. I sat down right there on the edge of the couch, clutching the pages like they might disappear if I blinked. This wasn't just a conversation anymore. They had plans. Concrete, discussed, researched plans. They were looking into putting me in a home like I was a used appliance. I gave them a house. I raised Daniel alone after Marjorie passed. I helped raise their children. I built this life with my bare hands. And now I was being outsourced. I kept the papers, hid them in my shed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Marjorie's rocking chair under the small light I'd rigged from the old fuse box. I laid out the brochures on my workbench and stared at each glossy smile, each pastel hallway. They were building a future without me. The next morning, I noticed more things. Rachel had been researching power of attorney laws. Her laptop was left open, careless, again, and there were tabs on elder care, inheritance, asset transfer. And Daniel, he was quieter lately. Not because of guilt, because he thought the endgame was in motion. I realized then that the conversations I'd had with him over the past few months were no longer real ones. He wasn't hearing me. He was managing me, pacifying me with nods and polite grunts until the day came when he could hand me off like luggage at an airport. I felt like an antique someone didn't know how to throw away. The betrayal sank in deepest when I overheard Ellie talking to her friend on FaceTime. "He lives with us for free," she said, laying on the couch, earbuds in. "But he doesn't really do anything. Just walks around and listens to talk radio." Her friend laughed. "Isn't that annoying?" "So annoying. Mom says she wants to convert his room into a study." I stood in the hallway, unseen, a breath caught in my throat. I didn't feel angry. I felt erased. This was what they thought of me, what they whispered in rooms when they thought I was too old, too slow to notice. I began paying attention. I started keeping a little notebook, small enough to fit in my pocket. I jotted down dates, things said, odd behaviors, changes in bills. Rachel had recently switched our power company and removed my name from the account. The Wi-Fi password changed. I wasn't told. Even the mailbox key was moved to her ring. I was being phased out of my own life. I had a flashback that night. Marjorie and I sitting on this very porch 25 years ago, sipping lemonade. She had a pencil behind her ear and her feet on the rail, laughing about something Ellie had said as a toddler. We used to talk about how we'd grow old here, how the grandchildren would visit, how we'd host Christmas even if we had to use walkers to hang ornaments. She used to say, "People forget what roots do. They hold things together." That memory nearly broke me, but it also grounded me, because now I realized I was the roots, and they were cutting me loose, so I made a quiet decision. If they were planning behind my back, I would plan behind theirs. I visited the county clerk's office the next morning, said I needed copies of the deed. The clerk, a kind woman in her 50s, asked if I wanted to make changes. "Not today," I said, "but soon." She looked at me with something between curiosity and sympathy. I gave her a small smile. That afternoon, I made an appointment with an old friend, Thomas, my lawyer. We'd gone to school together. He'd retired last year, but I knew he'd come out of hibernation for this. When I explained what was happening, he didn't interrupt. He just listened. At the end, he said, "Harold, do you want revenge or peace?" I looked at the wedding band I still wore. "I want dignity, and I want Marjorie's house to mean something again." He nodded. "Then let's make sure it ends on your terms." We got to work. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I confronted Daniel the following Sunday, not with rage, not with shouting, just a steady calm I didn't know I had left. We were sitting on the porch. He was scrolling on his phone, barely noticing the bird song or the smell of freshly cut grass. The same porch where I used to hold him as a baby while Marjorie sang lullabies through the open window. "Daniel," I said, "we need to talk." He looked up, half distracted. "Sure, Dad. What's up?" "I found the Oak Meadows packet." He froze, eyes still, lips parted slightly. For a second I thought he might try to deny it. Instead, he sighed. "You went through our things." I pulled it out of the trash, not exactly locked away. He didn't speak. "You were planning to move me into a home," I said. Daniel shifted, crossing his arms. "It wasn't like that." "No?" I said. "Then tell me exactly what it was like." He glanced toward the window. Rachel's silhouette was behind the curtain, clearly listening. "You're not well, Dad. You talk to yourself. You forget things. You wander outside at night." I blinked. "I've been taking walks every night for 30 years, and I talk to your mother. She's gone, but that doesn't mean I've lost my mind." He looked uncomfortable. "It's more complicated than that." "You mean it's more convenient to believe that than admit you don't want me here?" Daniel's jaw tightened. "This is our home now." "I gave it to you under one condition," I said. "That I would live here, with dignity, until I chose otherwise. That clause still exists." "I know." He said it like a child caught sneaking out past curfew, guilty but defiant. Rachel came outside then, arms folded tight. "We just want what's best for everyone." "No," I said, looking at her squarely. "You want what's best for you, and you're willing to bulldoze through anyone who gets in the way." She opened her mouth to respond but paused. Something in my face must have told her not to push. "I'm not going anywhere," I said. "Not because I'm clinging to this place, but because I still have more to do here. I made a promise to my wife, and I intend to keep it." Daniel said nothing. Rachel walked away. That night I found something interesting. I'd been going through the house, slowly, carefully, noting all the things that had been moved, changed, erased. In the attic, behind an old chest of Christmas decorations, I found the original deed, the one Marjorie and I signed when we bought the house, yellowed with time but still intact, and attached to it was a letter from Marjorie. In her tidy handwriting she'd written, "If you're reading this, Harold, it means the house has outlived us both, or maybe you're here alone. If so, know this. This home is a place of love, not leverage. It belongs to whoever remembers that." I wept into that letter, because even in death, she knew the heart of what mattered. The next day, I went to see my neighbor, Mr. Alvarez. We'd known each other for years, though we hadn't spoken much since his wife passed. He invited me in, made coffee, and asked what was wrong. I told him everything. He listened. No judgment, just steady silence and the occasional nod. When I finished, he said, "You know, my daughter tried to take my name off the deed too, claimed it was for tax reasons, but it was really about control." "What did you do?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "I sold it to a veterans housing nonprofit. Now I live in the guest house and they run programs out of the main property. They treat me like family, better than my own." That planted a seed. Maybe my purpose wasn't to keep the house. Maybe it was to honor it. A few days later, I visited an old church friend, Martha, who worked with a legal aid group. I explained my situation and she offered to help quietly review my legal standing. She confirmed what I already knew. I still had conditional ownership rights. If I proved they violated the clause, I could reclaim control. "Do you want to?" she asked. "That kind of move, it changes everything." "I think everything's already changed," I said. Back at home, Daniel started walking on eggshells. He stopped saying goodnight. He spent more time at work. Rachel avoided me entirely. Ellie barely acknowledged me, but I didn't care, because I had started planning. I called Thomas again. We discussed contingencies, legal pathways. The clause in the deed gave me one final ace. Then I made a call to a local real estate friend, not to sell the house yet, but to assess its value, quietly, discreetly. It was worth more than I thought, and more than Rachel and Daniel could afford to lose. They had no idea I was watching everything, every careless word, every cold shoulder, every dismissed look. It all told me one thing. They believed they'd already won. They hadn't, not yet. Thomas welcomed me into his office with a quiet nod. It was a small space above the old bakery, filled with dusty books and the scent of oak. He hadn't redecorated in 30 years. I like that. Some things, when they're solid, don't need changing. He poured me a glass of water and waited. "I'm ready," I said. "Let's write the will." He set down his pen gently. "All right, Harold, but are you sure?" I took a deep breath. my hand instinctively touching the band on my finger. If I don't do this now, I won't be able to live with myself. Thomas opened a drawer, pulled out a fresh packet. Do you want to disinherit him entirely? I hesitated. That word, disinherit, felt like a knife, like cutting away the very thing I spent my life nurturing. But then I remembered Daniel's face when I mentioned Oak Meadows. Not guilt, just irritation, like I'd ruined his timing. Yes, I said. He and Rachel both. Thomas nodded, scribbling the note. I want the house to go elsewhere, I continued, and I want to add a clause. If this will is contested, the entire estate, including the house, will go to a charity of my choosing. He paused mid-sentence. That's a scorched earth clause. I know, I said quietly, but it's the only way to protect what matters. We spent 2 hours writing it all out. My small savings, the house, the furniture, the shed, everything detailed, everything accounted for. I left a modest fund for Ellie to be given when she turned 25, only if she had never lived with Rachel and Daniel again. That one hurt to write, but I couldn't reward this sickness, not even by blood. Thomas looked at me once we were done. This will break whatever's left between you. It's already broken, I said. I'm just burying the pieces properly. We added witnesses. 2 former colleagues of Thomas signed the papers with quiet glances. No one asked questions. They could feel the weight in the room. When it was over, Thomas slipped the documents into a sealed envelope and handed it to me. Keep this safe, he said. And Harold, I hope someday he understands. I don't need him to understand, I said. I need him to stop pretending love is a transaction. I left the office with the envelope tucked inside my coat like it was made of glass. Back home, I sat in the shed with Marjorie's rocking chair beside me, the envelope resting on the workbench like a sleeping dog. I poured myself a cup of tea and looked at the walls. Photos, old tools, rusted saws. A life lived with hands and heart, I whispered to her. You always said love was what you built, not what you owned. Well, I'm about to build something different. Rachel knocked on the shed door an hour later. I slid the envelope under the floorboard before opening it. She looked irritated, not concerned. You've been sneaking around. I raised an eyebrow. I've been taking walks and making calls. That's not illegal, is it? She crossed her arms. Daniel says you've been talking to lawyers. I stared at her. Why would that worry you? She paused, then leaned in slightly. Look, no one's trying to hurt you. We just want a little order, structure, a plan. A plan, I echoed. Like putting me in a home? Her face twitched. You're blowing this out of proportion. I'm not. I'm finally seeing it for what it is. She scoffed. Fine, be paranoid. But don't drag our family through drama. You're almost 80, Harold. Let us handle things. And there it was. The mask slipped. They didn't want a family. They wanted ownership, management, an asset to convert and control. I'm not your burden, I said calmly, and I'm not your property. She turned and walked away. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in weeks. I knew now that this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my name, my dignity, my wife's legacy. I made a few more calls in the days that followed. One to a veterans charity Thomas had mentioned. They provided transitional housing for retired servicemen. I asked what would happen if a property like mine became available. The man on the phone sounded stunned. That could house 8 men comfortably, he said. It'd be life-changing. I smiled. That's what I hoped. He asked if I wanted to remain on the premises. Yes, I said, but only if I'm useful. I want to fix things, teach, build. You'd be our backbone, he replied. And just like that, a new idea began to bloom. Daniel and Rachel still had no idea. I continued acting polite, even helped Daniel in the garden one afternoon. He talked about converting the basement into a media room. I nodded, smiling inside. They were still playing a game they thought they'd already won, but I held the winning card. It was just a matter of when to play it. The final straw came on a Tuesday morning. Quiet, gray, nothing special in the air. Daniel had left early for work, and Rachel was at the kitchen table typing away on her laptop. I poured myself some tea and sat across from her, nodding politely. She didn't even look up. "Ellie's not coming home after school today?" I asked gently. Rachel exhaled through her nose. "She's staying with a friend. You'll survive." There was always this edge in her tone now, cold steel wrapped in a smile. "I always enjoy hearing about her day," I said, trying to keep it light. "She's 17. She's growing up. She doesn't need to give you a report," she muttered. I sipped my tea slowly, eyes on the garden. I could feel her watching me. "You know, Harold," she said suddenly, her tone sugar-slicked, "I've been meaning to talk to you about space." I turned toward her. "Space?" She closed her laptop and leaned in slightly. "We've been thinking it's time to expand. Daniel's working more from home, and I could really use a dedicated office. The guest room is too small, and we've had our eye on the den." The den. My den. The one place in the house I still called mine. "And where would I go?" I asked evenly. "Well, that's the thing," she said, her voice too smooth. "We've started looking at a small assisted living unit nearby. Nothing drastic. You'd still be close. They have bingo nights, movie screenings. It's clean, safe, and very manageable." Manageable. I nearly dropped the mug. "I'm not a spreadsheet," I said. "You don't get to move me around like a broken chair." Rachel stood. "We're doing what's best for the household. This house is ours now. You said so yourself when you signed it over." I stood too, my voice low. "You think a signature means the past doesn't matter? That years of blood, sweat, and tears are erased by paperwork?" She smirked. "No one's erasing anything. We're just moving forward." I didn't respond. I just walked to the den, closed the door behind me, and sat in silence for a long, long time. That evening I packed everything that mattered. Not clothes or trinkets, documents, deeds, letters, the will. I made 3 copies of everything. One went into a locked file box in the shed. Another went to Thomas. The third I kept with me at all times now. The next day I withdrew half my savings and transferred the rest to a secure account under the Veterans Housing Nonprofit's legal advisory, just in case. Then I made one final appointment with the nonprofit director, Mr. Lynch. We walked the property together. I showed him the garden, the shed, the attic with the old insulation, the space above the garage. He took notes, asked thoughtful questions. "This place is a dream," he said softly. "You're sure you want to go through with this?" I nodded. "If I do nothing, they'll gut it for a walk-in closet." He chuckled, then grew serious. "We can move quickly, quietly, no press, no noise." "Perfect," I said. "Let's wait until Friday. Daniel won't be home until late. Office retreat. Rachel will be out shopping. It'll be smooth." We shook hands. Thursday night I made dinner. Roast chicken, Marjorie's recipe. I even folded cloth napkins and set the table. Rachel didn't show. Daniel barely touched his plate. "Something wrong?" I asked him. He looked tired, more so than usual. "Rachel says you've been acting strange." "Strange," I smiled gently. "Or just awake." He didn't respond, just mumbled something about early meetings and went to bed. I stayed at the table long after, watching the candle burn low. I whispered a few words to Marjorie. "Tomorrow, love. Tomorrow we take our house back." Friday morning, everything moved like clockwork. The paperwork was finalized at 9:12 a.m. Thomas called to confirm. At 11:30, the moving van arrived, marked St. Jude Transitional Housing. Three polite young men unloaded supplies: bunk beds, folding chairs, kitchenware. At 1:15 p.m., the nonprofit's legal representative arrived with final documents for me to sign. At 2:00, the locks were changed. At 2:45, I walked through the house one last time alone. Each room echoed with the past. Ellie's laughter, Marjorie's piano, Daniel's footsteps. It wasn't grief I felt. It was release. At 3:00, Rachel came home. She stood in the driveway, bags in hand, mouth slightly open. "What the hell is this?" she snapped as I opened the door. "Your new neighbors," I said calmly. "St. Jude Housing now owns this property." She laughed. "Very funny." "I'm not joking," I said. "You can check the deed registry yourself." She barged past me into the living room, eyes darting around at the boxes, the paperwork, the legal team. "You can't do this," she whispered, her face blanching. "Oh, but I could," I said. "And I did." She turned toward me, eyes wild. "Daniel is going to lose his mind." "Maybe he should have used it sooner," I said. I stepped outside, the sun warm on my face. Behind me, the house was no longer a cage. It was a sanctuary, one they never understood. Saturday came with a chill in the air. It was Daniel's birthday, 45 years old. Rachel had planned a backyard gathering with balloons, a grill, and a handful of their work friends. I wasn't invited, of course, but I went anyway. I stood at the edge of the lawn in my best pressed shirt, holding a folder tucked under my arm. The house looked different already. The new nonprofit team had rearranged some furniture, repainted the living room. It wasn't a home anymore, not theirs. Daniel was laughing with two colleagues near the barbecue. Ellie sat on the porch steps, arms crossed, scrolling through her phone. Rachel was pouring wine. Rachel noticed me first. She froze. Her hand hovered mid-pour. Daniel turned and followed her gaze. His face went pale. "What are you doing here?" he called out, approaching me slowly. "I came to wish you a happy birthday," I said, "and clear a few things up." "Dad," he said in a low voice, "this isn't the time." "No," I interrupted. "This is exactly the time." I stepped closer. A hush began to fall over the guests. "You stood in this house, my house, and told me I didn't belong, that I should be managed, moved, erased. You wanted me quiet and out of the way." "Stop," Rachel hissed from behind him. "You took everything I built," I continued, my voice steady, "and treated it like a handout, not a legacy, not a home, just another asset." Daniel glanced around, embarrassed. "You need to leave." I opened the folder. "Actually, you do." I held up the papers, the deed transfer, the will, the revocation of any previous inheritance promises. "This house no longer belongs to you. It hasn't for 24 hours. Rachel surged forward, trying to snatch the papers, but I stepped back. "Don't bother. Copies are with my lawyer, with the county, and with the St. Jude Housing Board." A middle-aged man in a suit stepped forward. "Hello, I'm David Lynch, Executive Director of St. Jude. We're now the legal owners of this property." The silence was deafening. One of Daniel's friends muttered, "Wait, this place is a charity home now?" Daniel looked as if someone had hit him. "You gave it away?" "I did," I said. "To people who will treat it with care and gratitude, not entitlement." "But," Daniel's voice cracked, "you said it was mine." "No," I said calmly. "You assumed it was. There's a difference." He looked at me, eyes wide and wet, but I saw no apology there. Only loss, anger, fear. Rachel pulled him back, whispering something into his ear. Ellie walked down the steps slowly, staring at me. "Grandpa, is this real?" I nodded. Yes, sweetheart. This house will still be here, but for people who need it more than your parents ever did. She didn't speak, just stood quietly. I tried, I said, voice faltering. God knows I tried. I wanted to believe this family still remembered what mattered. Daniel took a step forward. You're punishing me for one mistake. One? I asked. No, I'm protecting myself from a pattern. I turned to go. The new residents were scheduled to arrive the following week. Until then, I'd be staying at a small guest house a friend had offered. Wait, Daniel said. I turned back. His mouth opened, but no words came. I waited. Nothing. I nodded once and walked away, the folder still under my arm. The breeze picked up. Somewhere behind me, a balloon snapped loose and floated into the sky. And I kept walking. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The quiet that followed wasn't the peaceful kind. It was heavy, like the hush after a storm that's torn off the roof. I spent the next few days at Walter's guest house, a small 2-room cottage near the woods, tucked behind his property. It smelled of cedar and old books, and for the first time in a long while, I could hear my own thoughts without interruption. Daniel didn't call. Rachel didn't show up. Ellie didn't message. Silence. I'd expected rage, accusations, maybe even legal threats, but they gave me nothing. And somehow, that hurt more. Walter was kind, didn't press, brought me coffee in the mornings and sat quietly with me on the porch as we watched deer pass through the trees. You look like a man who finally stepped off a sinking boat, he said one morning. Yeah, I muttered, but the water's still cold. He chuckled softly. Around town, word traveled fast. This wasn't a big city. It didn't take long before whispers followed me at the grocery store. Half of them said I'd gone senile. The other half called me brave. 2 older women at the post office stopped talking the moment I walked in. A man at the diner, a widower like me, tipped his cap and said, "Took guts, what you did." People had opinions, but none of them knew the years behind it, the slow erosion of respect, the quiet betrayals. One afternoon, I walked through the old neighborhood, past the park where Marjorie and I used to push Daniel on the swings, past the church where Ellie was baptized, past the bakery that had closed after the owner's son moved away. Everything felt smaller. I sat on a bench outside the library and pulled out a photo from my coat pocket, Marjorie holding Daniel as a baby, smiling like nothing else in the world mattered. I tried, love, I whispered. I really tried. Sometimes, at night, I'd dream of her. She'd be standing at the kitchen window, humming while she washed dishes, looking over the garden. I'd walk in, tell her what had happened, expecting her to be angry. But in the dream, she just looked at me and said, "It was never about the house, Harold. It was always about the heart." Then she'd fade, and I'd wake up to the sound of wind against the siding. One evening, I got a knock at the guest house door. It was Margaret, my neighbor from 2 streets over. She held a small pot of soup and a half smile. "I heard," she said simply. "Just thought you could use something warm." We sat together in silence, the smell of carrots and dill filling the room. "I don't get it," she said softly after a while. "He was such a sweet boy." I nodded. He was. What happened? I think I made things too easy for him, I said. I gave, and somewhere along the way he forgot what things cost. "Do you regret it?" she asked. I looked down into the bowl. "No, but I mourn it." Before she left, she touched my shoulder gently. "If you ever need company, I'm 2 blocks away. Just knock." That night, I pulled out the folder again. The papers, the will, the legal proof that the house was no longer theirs. It didn't give me satisfaction, just closure. One morning, I saw Ellie walking across the field behind the property. She didn't see me, Or maybe she did and chose to look away. Either way, she didn't stop. She used to run into my arms when she saw me. Now she walked past. Later that week, Thomas came by, brought coffee and donuts, sat on the porch with me. "You okay?" he asked. "I'm getting there," I said. "You did what most wouldn't dare." "I just wanted my dignity back." He nodded. "You know, I've seen families torn apart by money, but never like this. This wasn't about greed. It was about control." "That's what hurts the most," I said. "They didn't even need the house. They just wanted me gone." He was quiet for a while. "You know what I think?" he finally said. "You've got more life left than you realize. That house was a weight. Now you can breathe." I wasn't sure I believed him, but I wanted to. The leaves began to fall. The trees turned golden. The town moved on. So did I. Slowly, quietly, and alone. But something had shifted. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was starting to live again. It started with a knock on the guest house door, sharp, eager, and completely unexpected. A young woman stood there, no more than 30, with a clipboard and a nervous smile. Her name was Denise. She worked with St. Jude's Housing Initiative and had been assigned as project coordinator for the transition of my old home into community housing. "I know this might be strange," she said, brushing a loose curl behind her ear, "but I wanted to personally thank you. What you've done, it's rare, selfless." I didn't know how to respond. For so long, I'd been cast as the burden, the problem. Now here was someone seeing me as something else. Would you like to be involved?" she asked. "It's still your vision, in a way. We could use your insight, maybe even your story." Something in me stirred. The next morning, I walked with her back to the house. My house. Now just the building that used to be mine. There were volunteers inside already, painting, assembling bunk beds, sorting donated blankets. It smelled like sawdust and lemon cleaner, fresh, new, but still familiar. They'd kept the mantel where Marjorie's photo used to sit. The kitchen tiles I laid by hand were still there, scuffed but solid. I walked through slowly, memories brushing against me like old ghosts. But they didn't haunt me. Not anymore. Denise led me to a makeshift office in what used to be Daniel's bedroom. "We're thinking of calling it Marjorie's house," she said quietly. I paused, throat tightening. She would have liked that. Over the next week, I found myself showing up more often, helping hang curtains, repairing a squeaky door, even painting a mural with a local artist, a blooming tree whose branches reached over every doorway. I didn't talk about Daniel or Rachel or Ellie, not with the volunteers, not with the residents who began trickling in. It wasn't anger anymore. It was something else. Acceptance, maybe, or just quiet resolve. One morning, I helped carry in a box of books from the trunk of a minivan. A woman in her 50s thanked me, eyes tired but kind. "This place, it's the first safe place I've had in years," she said. I nodded, heart heavy. Then it's finally being used right. As the days turned into weeks, the house transformed. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It didn't need to. But I started to realize something. Maybe I wasn't done yet. One evening, I sat on the porch with Denise and a few volunteers, sipping tea as the sun dipped behind the trees. They asked me about the house's history, about Marjorie, about the early days raising Daniel. I told them everything, the good years, the Sunday pancakes, the laughter that used to fill these rooms. "Why'd you give it up?" someone finally asked. I looked out at the yard where Daniel once played with a stick pretending it was a sword. "Because I wanted it to matter again," I said, "to be filled with life, not silence." They nodded, quiet. No one pried. Later that night, I stayed behind, walked the halls, touched the edges of the window frames, and I knew. I couldn't just visit this place. I had to give it everything I had left. The next morning, I told Denise I wanted to stay involved, permanently, not as an owner, but as a steward, a live-in volunteer if they'd have me. She smiled. We'd be honored. By week's end, I'd moved into the small room near the back staircase, the one Marjorie used to use when she needed quiet. I put a photo of her by the bed, just her smile and the sea behind her. I woke early, cooked breakfasts, fixed leaky faucets, told stories to the young men who came in with bruised pride and hollow eyes. They listened. Some even laughed. One of them, a tall kid named Rico, asked me, "Why do you help us, man? You don't even know us." "I know what it feels like to be pushed out of your own life," I said. "Everyone deserves a second start." The rooms began to fill, not with my family, not Daniel or Rachel or Ellie, but with people who called me Mr. Harold and brought me flowers from the garden, who asked for advice, who sat with me on hard days. The house felt alive again. One afternoon, I sat by the fireplace, flipping through an old journal. A note Marjorie had written fell out from between the pages. It read, "Home isn't who shares your name, it's who sees your heart." I stared at the words for a long time. She always knew the truth long before I did. That night, I put her note on the wall of the dining room, and I knew I hadn't lost everything. I had found something else, something real. I used to think family was something you were born into, a last name, a bloodline, a list of holidays shared out of obligation. But living here changed that. Family started showing up in ways I never expected. Rico, the tall, quiet kid who once barely made eye contact, began calling me Pop. The first time he said it, we were working on the garden beds together. He handed me a trowel, wiped the sweat from his brow, and said, "Here you go, Pop." I didn't correct him, didn't need to. Then there was Carla, a young mother who moved into the east room with her daughter Lila. She always left a cup of tea for me in the morning and a note with a Bible verse or a silly joke. One night Lila slipped a drawing under my door, a picture of me with big round glasses and a smile too wide for my face, holding hands with stick figure people under a banner that read, "Marjorie's Family." I pinned it on the wall beside my bed. The house had its rhythm now, meals at 6, chores by 8, quiet hours after 10. We celebrated birthdays, even mine, though I insisted on no fuss. They brought cake anyway, chocolate, with "Happy Birthday, Mr. H," written in shaky frosting. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was aging alone. Denise stopped by every week. She said the program had never seen a success like this. "You've turned it into more than a shelter," she told me. "It's a home." She wasn't wrong. Even Thomas came by more often. He helped with minor repairs and sat with me in the evenings, sharing a cold beer and stories about his wife before she passed. We were two old men watching a younger generation try to figure things out, with laughter, mistakes, and sometimes tears. One Friday afternoon, I found a small envelope in the mailbox, no return address, just my name written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Inside was a photo, a younger version of him, maybe 10, riding on my shoulders. Marjorie behind the camera, and a note. "I know I ruined what we had. I don't expect forgiveness, but I remember this day, and I hope you do too." I stared at it for a long while. I didn't cry, but I felt something shift. I didn't respond. Not out of anger, but because I didn't know what to say yet. Days passed. The garden grew. Lila lost her first tooth and showed everyone in the house. Rico got his GED and cooked for the whole house to celebrate. Carla found a job at the local bakery and brought home extra muffins every Tuesday. And one crisp morning in late October, someone else came back. Ellie. I was outside trimming the hedges when I heard her voice. "Grandpa." I turned. She was taller now, dressed simply, holding a small duffel bag. Her eyes were wet. I I saw the videos online, she said, about this place. I didn't know. I didn't know you did all this. She looked at the house, then at me. Mom never told me. I didn't speak, just opened the gate. She walked slowly, hesitantly, like someone stepping onto sacred ground. "Can I stay a while?" she asked. "Of course," I said softly. "Your room's still upstairs. The mattress might be new, but the view's the same." She gave a shaky smile. Over the next few days, she helped in the kitchen, read stories to Lila, and played cards with Rico in the evenings. She asked about Marjorie's favorite recipes, and I taught her to make peach cobbler from scratch. Late one night, we sat on the porch together. The stars were out, and the cicadas hummed. "I'm sorry I disappeared," she said. "I missed you," I replied. She didn't explain, and I didn't ask. Some things don't need dissecting. They just need time and presence. She stayed for a week, then another. She started attending Denise's community leadership sessions. She had ideas for the house: art therapy, job training, a reading nook in the back corridor. And she called me Grandpa again. One evening she asked if she could call her dad, Daniel. "I don't know if he'll answer," she said, "but I want him to know I found something worth holding on to." I nodded. "Tell him the door's not locked, but it's not wide open either." She smiled sadly. "That's fair." As winter approached, the house glowed with warmth, not just from the heater but from the laughter, the shared meals, the tiny rituals that made it feel like something sacred. One night, I sat alone in the study and stared at Marjorie's picture. "You see this, love?" I whispered. "You always said this house had more to give. I thought it'd be for our grandkids, but maybe it was for all of them." She didn't answer, of course, but I felt her, in the smell of fresh-baked bread, in the sound of Rico teaching Lila how to ride her scooter in the hallway, in the way Carla softly hummed while folding laundry. This wasn't the family I'd raised, but it was the family I'd found, and maybe, just maybe, the one I was meant to lead. It was a quiet Saturday afternoon when I saw his car pull up across the street. I recognized it immediately. Same dent in the fender, same faded bumper sticker from his college days. Daniel stepped out slowly, dressed in a plain gray sweater and jeans, holding something wrapped in brown paper. I didn't move from the porch, just watched. He didn't look up right away, stared at the house like he was remembering something, or maybe bracing himself. Then he crossed the street and stood at the gate. I stayed seated. "Hi, Dad," he said softly. I nodded. "Daniel." He looked older, not just in the lines around his eyes, but in the way he carried himself. Shoulders a little hunched, eyes a little dimmer. Regret has a way of aging a person more than time ever could. "Can I come in?" he asked. I studied him. The house was full today. Kids playing in the back, Carla baking in the kitchen, Rico tuning his guitar on the steps. But everything felt still in that moment. I stood slowly and walked to the gate, opened it. Just for a few minutes. He stepped in like he was afraid the ground might reject him. We sat on the bench under the big oak tree, the same one he used to climb as a boy. "I've been watching what you've done here," he said, voice low. "I saw the videos, read the articles. Ellie told me everything." I didn't say anything. He unwrapped the package in his hands and handed it to me. It was the deed to the house, signed back to me. "I shouldn't have done what I did," he said. "I was selfish. I let Rachel push me, but I didn't stop her. I thought I deserved the house because I was your son." "You thought wrong," I said, not harshly, just firmly. He nodded. "I know. And I know this won't fix it. I don't expect you to. Forgive me. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. Truly." For a long moment we sat in silence. Wind rustled the leaves above us. "I'm not taking the house back," I said finally, handing the deed back. "It belongs to the people who need it now. I belong to them too, in a way." He looked at me, eyes glistening. "I lost you, didn't I?" I took a breath. "You lost something, but not everything." I glanced toward the house. "Ellie still wants you in her life. She's doing good things here. Maybe you can earn your way back to her." "And you?" he asked, almost a whisper. I looked at him then. Really looked. This wasn't the boy I raised. But maybe, just maybe, he was trying to be a better man than the one who kicked me out. "I don't hate you, Daniel," I said. "But I don't need you either. Not anymore. I've built something else. Something stronger." He nodded, eyes downcast. "I'm proud of what you've done," he said. I nodded once. "I know." We sat a while longer. He asked about the residents, about Ellie's plans for expansion, about the mural in the dining hall. I told him what he needed to hear, but not everything. When he finally stood to leave, he looked around one last time. "It still feels like home," he said. "It is," I replied. "Just not yours." He didn't argue, didn't plead, just gave a small nod and walked back toward the gate. Before he left, he turned back one last time. If you ever want to talk, I'll be around." I gave a slow nod. "Take care of yourself." And then he was gone. The moment he drove off, Ellie stepped out from the house. She'd been watching from the window. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside me. "I am," I said. She slipped her hand into mine. "I told him he had a long way to go," she said. "He does." She rested her head on my shoulder. "I'm glad he came, even if it's too late." "It's not about timing," I said. "It's about truth." And finally, he spoke it. We sat there until the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the yard. Inside, laughter rang out, Lila squealing, Rico strumming a silly tune, Carla shouting about burnt cookies, and I smiled. This was my family now. They weren't perfect, neither was I. But we had found each other, built something with kindness and healing and honesty. Daniel had brought blood, but they brought soul, and in that balance, I'd found peace. Have you ever felt betrayed by your own family? Let us know in the comments. The day we unveiled the plaque, the sky was the clearest it had been in weeks. The front yard buzzed with quiet energy. Neighbors setting up chairs, kids chasing each other across the lawn, Denise arranging flowers near the front porch. Someone had strung lights from the trees to the roof, casting soft golden arcs across the gathering space. At the center of it all, just beneath the porch awning, was a bronze plate, modest and elegant. It read, "Marjorie's House, a place to begin again." My fingers traced the edges of her name. I could almost hear her laugh, that warm, throaty chuckle she'd let out whenever someone complimented her cooking or when she beat me at Scrabble. "You'd have loved this," I whispered. "You always knew the house had more to give than just shelter. You were right." The crowd quieted as Denise stepped forward to speak. She was radiant, confident, kind, exactly the woman Marjorie would have adored. "This house began as a home built by love," she said. "It has survived heartbreak, betrayal, and reinvention. And because of one man's choice to turn pain into purpose, it now stands as a refuge for those who need a fresh start." She gestured toward me. "And so today, we officially open Marjorie's House as a permanent community resource. Part shelter, part mentorship hub, part home, all heart." Applause echoed across the lawn. I wasn't one for speeches, but they handed me the microphone anyway. I cleared my throat, the weight of years pressing on my chest. "I don't have fancy words," I said, voice cracking a little, "but I do have truth." I paused, scanning the crowd. faces I'd come to know and cherish. Rico with his arms crossed, fighting back a grin. Carla holding Lila close, tears in her eyes. Thomas with his weathered hands in his pockets, nodding slowly. This house, it gave me life. It gave me family. Not the one I raised, but the one I found when I had nothing left to give. I looked up at the plaque. My wife, Marjorie, was the heart of this place. She believed in people, in second chances, in kindness that didn't need to be earned. I swallowed the lump in my throat. I thought I'd lost everything when I gave this house away and got kicked out of it. But losing it was the beginning of something better, because it taught me that home isn't walls, it's not bloodlines or titles, it's the people who choose to stand beside you when the lights go out. More silence, then slow clapping, then the whole yard was cheering. I didn't cry, not then. But when Lila handed me a drawing, another one, of the house filled with people and hearts and dogs and cats and sunshine, I had to turn away for a second. Later that night, the house was full again. Laughter in the halls, music in the background, dishes clattering from the kitchen. Ellie sat beside me on the porch, sipping lemonade. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "We did." She smiled and leaned her head on my shoulder. Daniel hadn't returned since that day on the bench. He sent a letter once, handwritten, no return address. Just a few lines. "I'm doing the work now. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. I'll keep trying." That was enough. Sometimes people return in pieces. Sometimes they don't return at all. And that's okay. You learn to plant roots in new places. Inside, Rico led a songwriting circle. Carla baked bread with 3 other residents for the town's weekend market. Ellie and Denise had plans to open a satellite location in the next county. Marjorie's house wasn't just a shelter now, it was a movement. I walked through the halls before bed, running my fingers across the walls. Paintings from former residents, little handprints in the kitchen tiles, quotes scribbled on chalkboards. "You are not your past. Here, we build forward." I stopped at the photo of Marjorie and me. Our wedding day, her in that cream dress with the lopsided veil, me with more hair and less wisdom. "I kept my promise," I whispered. "I kept the house full." Back in my room, I lit a candle for her. That was our tradition. 1 candle, every Sunday evening, just to say we were thinking of each other, even when we were apart. I think about her a lot these days, not in the way that aches, but in the way that steadies me. I still wear her ring on a chain around my neck. Some nights I imagine her voice reading to the kids in the living room, her hands guiding mine in the kitchen, her laughter echoing through the hall. She would have loved this mess of a house, loved how it grew louder, warmer, fuller every day. Because love doesn't disappear when the people do. It lingers in the spaces we create. And this house, our house, was alive again. Not with wealth, not with perfection, but with purpose. And in the quiet that followed the celebration, I sat in my old chair, looked out over the porch, and whispered one last thing to the night. "We're home, Marjorie. We're finally home."